There are two kinds of players who circle a generational superstar. The first kind shows up ready to do the ugly work. They set brutal screens, absorb the cheap shots, guard the toughest assignments, and make sure the franchise centerpiece never has to look over her shoulder. Their value doesn't show up in highlights. It shows up in how freely the star gets to operate. The second kind is more dangerous. They see the sold-out arenas, the ratings explosion, the endorsement deals, and the algorithmic goldmine that comes with being near greatness. And they don't want to protect it. They want to borrow it. Right now, the Indiana Fever are sitting in the middle of the biggest attention storm women's basketball has ever seen. Caitlin Clark didn't just move the needle. She bent the entire economy of the league around her gravity. And now, every fringe roster player, every free agent looking for relevance, every veteran trying to extend their career is asking the same question. How do I get close to that? But here's the problem. Not everyone who wants in belongs there. And one bad addition doesn't just hurt chemistry. It can collapse the entire system. Leticia Amihere is 6'3", athletic, and exactly the kind of defensive presence Indiana has been hunting for. She's got length, mobility, and the frame to challenge shots at the rim. On paper, she's a perfect fit. But this isn't happening on paper. It's happening on Instagram. Amihere, who previously played with the Golden State Valkyries, recently posted herself decked out in full Indiana Fever gear. Not subtly, not as a fan, as a campaign. This wasn't a quiet conversation with an agent or a private workout request sent through back channels. This was a public audition designed to generate buzz, build narrative, and attach her name to the Caitlin Clark experience before a contract was ever discussed. And that changes the entire evaluation. From a pure... Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a video. Pure basketball standpoint, Indiana desperately needs what she brings. They need rim protection. They need someone who can switch onto guards, recover to shooters, and still clean the glass. They need a physical tone setter who makes opponents think twice before attacking the paint. Clark is going to get hit. She's going to take contact off the ball, get grabbed on cuts, and absorb the kind of fouls that don't make the highlight reel but add up over 82 possessions a night. The Fever needs someone who makes that expensive. Someone who steps into the chaos so the engine stays clean. But here's where it gets complicated. A front office can measure height and wingspan in one workout. They can test vertical leap, lateral quickness, and defensive rebounding rate. What they can't measure in one workout is intention. They can't tell if someone is coming to do the job or coming to ride the wave. And when a player starts their recruitment with a social media campaign instead of a phone call, that's not confidence. That's a red flag. Because the question stops being whether she can defend and starts being what she's really chasing. Is she chasing stops and wins? Or is she chasing visibility, followers, and a backdoor into the same endorsement ecosystem that's made Clark into a cultural icon? Indiana can't afford to guess wrong. Championship teams built around elite guards almost always have the same kind of shadow player. Not the second star, not the veteran leader, the enforcer. The player who lives in the margins of the box score and still decides games. Dennis Rodman didn't need the ball, but the Bulls don't win 6 without him. Draymond Green frustrates fans with his offense, but Golden State's dynasty doesn't exist without his defensive versatility and edge. These players understand the assignment. They know their value isn't in points or all-star votes. It's in making life easier for the players who carry the offensive load. Indiana is hunting for their version of that. Someone who turns every screen into a collision. Someone who makes cutting to the basket feel dangerous for opponents. Someone who doesn't need the ball in their hands to control the pace and physicality of the game. The role is simple. Be big when it matters. Rebound like your contract depends on it. Defend without fouling. Hit the open shot when the defense collapses. And most importantly, understand that this offense has a hierarchy, and you're not at the top of it. That's not disrespect. That's structure. Caitlin Clark is the system. Everything runs through her vision, her pace, her decision-making. The supporting cast doesn't get to renegotiate that just because they arrive with a resume. But here's the thing about role players in high-attention environments. Some of them accept the role and thrive. Others accept it publicly, then quietly start testing boundaries. They start hunting for extra touches. They start freelancing in transition. They start looking for moments to showcase individual skill instead of executing the read. And when that happens, the entire offense slows down. Spacing tightens. The ball sticks. What used to be a fluid, high-value system turns into late clock isolations and contested jumpers. That's how a contender becomes mediocre in a month. So Indiana's front office can't just evaluate talent. They have to evaluate hunger. Not competitive hunger, attention hunger. There's a difference. One leads to wins. The other leads to drama, dysfunction, and wasted possessions. And in a league where the margin between playoff team and pretender is razor thin, they can't afford to import someone who confuses the two. Indiana has already seen what happens when someone joins the roster without accepting the hierarchy. Natasha Howard arrived with legitimate credentials. She's a former champion, a versatile forward who can score in multiple ways and defend across positions. On paper, she should have been exactly what the Fever needed. But somewhere between the contract signing and the actual games, the assignment got confused. Instead of complimenting Clark, Howard started competing with her. She brought the ball up the court when she shouldn't have. She took possessions that belonged to the primary creator. She operated like someone trying to prove she still had equity in the offense, rather than someone trying to amplify the system already in place. And it showed. The spacing collapsed. Possessions got clunky. What should have been a seamless partnership turned into a struggle for rhythm and control. The problem wasn't her talent. It was her intention. She didn't come to Indiana to be a role player. She came to be relevant again. And when a veteran tries to treat a young star's team like a personal rehab project, it poisons everything. The offense loses its identity. The locker room starts wondering who's really in charge. And the star, the one carrying the entire financial and cultural weight of the franchise, starts having to manage egos instead of just playing basketball. That's the nightmare scenario Indiana has to avoid as they evaluate the next wave of free agents. Because the wrong addition doesn't just underperform. The wrong addition fractures trust, slows decision-making, and turns a dangerous offensive system into something predictable and beatable. Defenses don't have to respect ball movement if they know the role players are hunting their own shots. They don't have to rotate hard if they know the offense is going to stall out in isolation. The entire defensive strategy shifts when the offense loses its structure. And once that happens, it doesn't matter how talented your star is. You're not winning anything meaningful. So when someone like Leticia Amihere posts herself in Fever gear, the front office has to ask a harder question than whether she fits the position. They have to ask whether she's ready to accept what comes with that gear. Because wearing it in a photo shoot is easy. Wearing it with purpose, discipline, and zero ego is a completely different challenge. If you want to know how to benefit from playing alongside a superstar without turning into a distraction, study Sophie Cunningham. She joined the Phoenix Mercury and immediately understood the assignment. She wasn't there to reinvent herself. She was there to do the dirty work that makes stars shine brighter. Cunningham became known for a few simple things. She ran the floor hard in transition. She hit open threes when defenses collapsed. She defended with real intensity, not performative energy. And critically, she stood up for her teammates when opponents started testing them physically. That last part matters more than people realize. In women's basketball, physicality often crosses the line into targeting. When a player like Caitlin Clark becomes the face of the league, opponents start looking for subtle ways to disrupt her rhythm. Extra contact off the ball, hard fouls that toe the line of flagrant, the kind of plays that don't always get called but absolutely get noticed. Cunningham made it clear that there was a cost to targeting her teammates. She didn't start fights. She didn't collect technical fouls every night, but she created a presence that made opponents think twice. That's value you can't quantify in a stat sheet, but it shows up in how freely the offense operates. And here's the key. Cunningham benefited massively from being in that ecosystem. Her name recognition went up. Her social media following exploded. She got more attention, more endorsement opportunities, and more leverage in future contract negotiations. But she earned it by doing her job, not by trying to rewrite the job description. She didn't demand more touches. She didn't hint that the offense needed to be more balanced. She didn't float award campaigns or try to position herself as an equal partner in the system. She played her role at an elite level, and the benefits followed naturally. That's the blueprint Indiana should be looking for. A player who sees the opportunity, understands the structure, and is comfortable thriving within it. Someone who knows that being the fifth best player on a championship team is worth more than being the second best player on a team that flames out in the first round. Someone who doesn't need the ball to make an impact and doesn't need the spotlight to feel valued. That player exists. The question is whether the Fever can identify them before they waste a roster spot on someone chasing clout instead of wins. While players are publicly campaigning for roster spots, a much bigger threat is lurking in the background. The WNBA and the Players' Union are locked in tense labor negotiations, and there's no guarantee the season starts on time. The scheduled opener is May 8th. But Adam Silver, the NBA commissioner who oversees the league's broader operations, has refused to set a hard deadline to ensure that date holds. That's not an accident. That's strategy. The union is pushing for major structural changes. They want revenue sharing tied to gross income, not just net profits. They want a significantly higher salary cap. They want guaranteed housing, better travel conditions, and long-term commitments that reflect the growth the league has experienced in the Caitlin Clark era. On the surface, those demands sound reasonable. The league just had its best season ever in terms of ratings, attendance, and cultural relevance. Players want to be compensated accordingly. But here's the problem. Ownership doesn't price long-term commitments off a single spike in attention. They price them off sustainability, downside risk, and what happens when the novelty fades. One explosive season doesn't prove the curve will stay elevated forever. It proves that under specific circumstances, with a specific generational talent, the product can break through. But what happens if Clark gets injured? What happens if the next draft class doesn't produce another transcendent star? What happens if casual fans drift back to the NBA once the newness wears off? Those are the questions ownership is asking, and they're the reason Silver isn't rushing to guarantee anything. Because the truth about leverage in labor negotiations is this: the side that can endure pain longer wins. Players need paychecks, owners need profits, but they have reserves. They have other revenue streams. They can wait. And Silver's refusal to set a deadline signals that ownership isn't afraid of a work stoppage. If anything, they might welcome it. Because every week that goes by without a deal is another week of financial pressure building on the players, not the league. That's the ugly reality behind all the inspirational union talk. Emotion isn't leverage. Cash reserves are leverage. Time is leverage. And right now, the players are operating like they hold cards they don't actually have. Meanwhile, the same athletes trying to join the Fever are campaigning for spots on a stage that might not exist in 2 months. Here's the contradiction nobody's talking about. Players are fighting for proximity to Caitlin Clark's spotlight while simultaneously supporting a labor strategy that could turn that spotlight off entirely. You can't have it both ways. You can't demand structural changes that ownership views as financially unsustainable, refuse to compromise, and still expect the season to roll forward on schedule like nothing's wrong. But that's exactly what's happening. Leticia Amihere posts herself in Fever gear, angling for a contract. Other free agents are floating interest through back channels and social media hints. Everyone wants access to the Caitlin Clark economy, the sold-out arenas, the primetime games, the endorsement proximity, the career resurrection that comes from being relevant again. But if the union overplays its hand and the season gets delayed or canceled, all of that evaporates. The attention moves on. Casual fans forget. Sponsors get nervous. And the entire financial ecosystem that made this moment possible starts to crack. That's the risk players don't seem to be pricing in. They're treating this negotiation like a moral argument, when the people across the table are treating it like a spreadsheet. Ownership isn't asking whether players deserve more. They're asking whether the league can afford more without bleeding money in year 3 when the hype cycle cools off. And if the answer is no, they'll let the calendar run out. They'll let the pressure build. They'll wait for players to miss enough paychecks that the demands start shrinking. It's cold, but it's effective. And it's happened in every major labor dispute in sports history. The side with deeper pockets outlasts the side that needs cash flow to survive. So when Adam Silver says he's not prepared to guarantee a start date, he's not panicking. He's applying pressure. He's reminding the union that time is a weapon and ownership controls it. Meanwhile, the Indiana Fever are trying to build a contender in the middle of this chaos. They're evaluating free agents who may or may not have jobs in 2 months. They're planning rotations for a season that may or may not happen. And they're doing it all while trying to protect the most valuable asset in women's basketball from either being physically targeted on the court or structurally undermined by a labor stoppage. It's a high-wire act, and one wrong step in either direction collapses everything. The Indiana Fever are in a position most franchises never experience. They have a generational talent in her prime, a financial windfall pouring in from every angle, and a competitive window that could define the next decade of the league. But they also have the most fragile ecosystem in professional sports. One wrong roster addition breaks the chemistry. One labor dispute breaks the calendar. One injury breaks the entire economic model. That's why every decision the front office makes right now carries exponential weight. They can't just sign players who fit on paper. They have to sign players who understand what they're protecting. This isn't about collecting talent. It's about building a system that maximizes Caitlin Clark's brilliance while minimizing the chaos around her. That means every free agent has to be screened not just for basketball ability, but for role, acceptance, ego management, and long-term intentionality. Can they defend? Yes. But will they defend without needing praise for it? Can they shoot? Yes. But will they take the open shot instead of hunting their own opportunities? Can they set screens? Yes. But will they set them to free up Clark? Or will they slip early to try and showcase their own finishing ability? These are the questions that separate a professional addition from a locker room disaster, and they're harder to answer than most front offices want to admit, because players lie, not maliciously, but aspirationally. They'll say all the right things in the interview. They'll talk about sacrifice, team-first mentality, and winning being the only thing that matters. Then they'll get on the court, see the cameras, feel the attention, and start renegotiating the role in real time. That's human nature. But it's also poison for a system that depends on trust, spacing, and instantaneous decision-making. The moment someone starts hunting stats instead of executing reads, the offense bogs down, defenses tighten, the ball sticks, and Caitlin Clark goes from playing free to playing frustrated. Indiana can't let that happen. They can't waste this window trying to manage egos or referee internal power struggles. They need enforcers, not influencers. They need players who make the hard play without needing credit for it. And if that means passing on talented players who come with motivational red flags, so be it. Because talent without discipline is just chaos in a different uniform. The WNBA is standing at a fork in the road, and both paths lead to consequences. On one side, you have the most explosive attention wave women's basketball has ever experienced. Real money, real ratings, real cultural penetration. Caitlin Clark didn't just move the needle. She redrew the entire map. On the other side, you have a labor negotiation being treated like a referendum on respect when the people holding the checks are treating it like actuarial science. And that gap between perception and reality is where everything falls apart. Players believe the spike in attention gives them permanent leverage. Ownership believes the spike is conditional, fragile, and dependent on factors that could disappear in a single offseason. One of them is right, and we're about to find out which. Meanwhile, Indiana is trying to build a dynasty in the middle of a potential work stoppage. They're evaluating free agents who might be chasing clout instead of championships. They're protecting a superstar who's carrying the financial weight of the entire league on her shoulders. And they're doing it all with a ticking clock that nobody's willing to stop. If the union misreads the leverage and the season gets delayed, the damage won't be evenly distributed. Players will feel it first. Paychecks stop, momentum dies, casual fans move on, sponsors get nervous, and the entire Caitlin Clark economy, the thing everyone's trying to attach themselves to, starts to crack. If Indiana misreads the roster and brings in the wrong personality, the damage is just as real. Chemistry collapses. The offense loses its identity. The competitive window closes before they ever get a real shot at a title. Either mistake is fatal. and both are completely avoidable if people stop treating this moment like it's guaranteed to last forever. The Clark era doesn't come with a safety net. It's not inevitable. It's fragile, and it has to be protected by people who understand what they're holding. So, here's the question. Should Indiana gamble on these public auditions if the on-court fit is legitimate? Or is the motivational risk too high for a chemistry-based system? And do you think Adam Silver is protecting the business or strategically teaching the union what real leverage looks like? Drop your thoughts below, and let's break this down. Stay locked in with my channel Simply Explained, your home for the truth behind the WNBA headlines.